In this video, a homeowner association neighbor called the police on me because I refused to let her use my property as a public road anymore. She repeatedly trespassed and I honestly have no idea what to do. Let's dive right into the video. The first one is titled HOA Karen Calls 911 because she cannot use my property as a public road anymore. Look, I know that all HOAs are not created equal, but from my experience, it's always the type of people that are a part of it that cause the most issues. My property borders an HOA neighborhood, and when I purchased it, I thought I did not have to worry about neighbors pulling any stunts. Well, that changed about a month after I moved in. So I have a strip of land that leads into one of the streets of the HOA neighborhood. It's cleared out of grass, so it does look like an unpaved road, but it technically is my property and not part of the city's jurisdiction. I began to notice tire tracks when I moved in, but figured they were left over from the previous owners. Then I woke up one weekend to see half a dozen cars driving through my property to get to the HOA neighborhood. Apparently, the strip of land was like a shortcut for my neighbors to get back to their homes instead of using one of the main roads a few minutes away. I reached out to the HOA about it, but because my property did not fall under their jurisdiction, they told me there wasn't anything they could do about the people using my property. I flagged down a few of the cars to try and get people to understand that they were technically trespassing on my property, but everyone I stopped claimed that they've always been able to use the road, and I couldn't just tell them to stop because I was annoyed. I was more than annoyed, but I still tried to be nice about this whole thing, not wanting to escalate it further than I needed to. I wanna say about a week after I called the HOA, I came home from work to see a car turning onto my property to use the road again. However, they turned too wide and too fast, which had their tires spin out for a second onto my yard. Once they were on the road, I saw that their car tore up a sizable chunk of my grass as well. I was furious and I knew that I needed to set some boundaries now that I knew that not a single person who used my property was gonna change. The last thing I wanted to do was get sued by someone, so I decided to take a more defensive approach to my property. I got to work on getting a fence put up around the entirety of my property, along with several no trespassing signs and a gate that covered the entrance to the road. The construction deterred people from using the road, so I figured that once the fence and gate were up, people were not gonna come onto my property anymore. I hung up the signs so that they faced a street where people would turn, making it very clear that they were trying to get onto private property to use this so-called shortcut. I also had security cameras around my property, just in case someone opened the gate when I was not home or damaged my yard if they tried to use the road again. I was not too worried, but I figured I was better safe than sorry. It took 2 weeks before someone tried to use the road again. It was a Saturday when I heard a bunch of honks coming from the street. I looked out the window to see a woman in a car parked right by the gate blaring her horn to try and get my attention. She did not let up after a few minutes, so I knew I needed to confront her. We're gonna call her Karen because she was just acting like one. Karen sees me come out of the house and gets out of her car to approach me. I stay a few feet away, not wanting to get into a full confrontation with her. She looked angry and I didn't know if she would try anything physical, so I kept my distance. Karen, are you the one that put up this gate? Me, yes I did. Karen, I need you to open it for me. I'm already late. Me, lady, I'm not gonna do that. This is my property and I don't want you driving through it. Karen, do you know who I am? Me? No, but whoever you claim to be, I want you and the rest of your neighbors to stop using my property. Karen, I have a seat on the HOA board. You have no right to block this road. Me, well, I do, because this is not a road. It's part of my property and I have every right to do what I want with my own land. Karen, how dare you? Karen went back to her car and grabbed her phone. I thought she was gonna call the HOA board and complain, so imagine my surprise when a cop car pulled up beside my fence. The officers got out of the car, and while one went over to Karen, the other approached me. He was very nice, letting me know that they received a call about someone blocking a public road with a fence and gate. I explained to the officer that the road was actually not a road and that I put up the fence and gate to stop Karen and her neighbors from coming onto my property illegally. I asked if I could bring out evidence and he let me go back into my house to grab the zoning plans that the fence builders had gotten. Like any good company, the people that installed my fence made sure that they were keeping to my property and not building on anything that was not mine. They had given me a map they got from the township I lived in that clearly showed my property lines, which included the strip of land that the HOA members were using for a road. I explained to the officers that I tried to reach out to the HOA to get them to stop their members from using my property as their own private shortcut, but I couldn't make any headway with them. So then I got the fence gate and signs to deter anyone from trying to drive on my property. The officers understood and said that they appreciated me taking the time to explain myself. They said they just need to finish taking Karen's statement before heading out. Of course, this was not something that Karen wanted to hear, and she made it known that she was not very happy with me. Karen, that man is blocking a road. The fence and gate needed to come down this instant. Officer number 1, ma'am, it's in black and white right here. This is not a public road and he has every right to build something around it to keep people off his property. Karen, it's not fair. We've been using this road for years and only now is someone making a fuss about it. Officer number 2, ma'am, unfortunately, there's nothing we can do. It is his property and you were trespassing. Karen, I will have you know that the HOA is not gonna be happy about this. I'm a board member and I'll find a way to get this road unblocked. Officer number 2, the HOA does not have any jurisdiction outside of their neighborhood. This man and his property are not owned by the HOA, so he does not have to listen to them or to you. Officer number 1, also any action that the HOA takes against this man and his property would be a violation of actual laws. So maybe take a breath and think before you say something you'll regret. Karen did so and ended up leaving in a huff. The officers then thanked me for my time and told me that they would do a follow-up with the HOA just to make sure the neighborhood understood the consequences that could come about if someone tried to trespass on my land or take down my fence and gate. I got a call from the HOA the next day letting me know that they put out a formal ordinance to the people in the neighborhood about my property and how no one was to use the road anymore. They also told me that they booted Karen from the board since after warning her about trying to get onto my property, she had a meltdown not dissimilar from the one she had when the cops showed up. They apologized for her behavior and did tell me that if anyone from the neighborhood tried to get onto my property without my permission, they wanted to know so those people could be punished. I'm sure they just wanted to cover their own butts so that I didn't sue them for the damage to my property if someone else tried to trespass. It was satisfying to hear them apologize though, so I felt vindicated. This last bit might be a little petty, but I really don't care. I checked out the footage from my camera from the day Karen came onto my property and got a clear view of the entire meltdown she had because of my fence. I grabbed some of the footage and uploaded it online, anonymously of course, just to show the world what kind of person Karen was. I found out through the grapevine that she ended up leaving the neighborhood since the HOA board called her out on her behavior. Now I am able to enjoy my property to the fullest with no threats of damage coming from cars or crazy HOA members. And if someone did try anything, I would be able to press charges against them for illegally coming onto my property. And the next one is a pro-revenge property story. And by the way, if you've enjoyed this story so far, please don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, because that would help me tremendously. After graduating college, my girlfriend and I moved to a new state where she was accepted into an engineering program. We found a lovely garden apartment style complex that advertised 100 megabits per second internet included in the price among a few other amenities. When we met the property manager, he seemed strict but well-mannered, nothing out of the ordinary, until we signed the lease. The first problem? Suddenly walking into his office was not allowed without an appointment. I had come by to ask a question, saw him browsing social media, and figured that he was as available as he made himself to us when we first came by unannounced to view a model apartment. But nope, he refused to answer my question and asked me to make an appointment via email. The second problem, the terms of our lease included an attachment to complete within 48 hours of accepting the keys that details all discrepancies within the unit. We submitted the attachment via email around the 40th hour. The property manager responded that the terms recently changed from 48 to 24 hours, and since we had passed 24 hours, we would be held liable for all found damages. When citing our copy of the lease, which explicitly stated 48 hours, he informs us that we signed an outdated copy and would need to make an appointment to come by the office and sign a new lease. The third problem, the internet speed was not 100 Mbits as advertised, it was less than 15 Mbits of peak and about 5 megabits per second on peak. We again contacted the property manager to complain, but were referred to make an appointment. The fourth problem, we made an appointment to address the previous 3 problems. During this meeting and after I finished voicing our issues, the property manager leans forward and says, "There are other communities in this neighborhood that may be more accepting of people like you and your girlfriend. You're welcome to break the lease and leave." People like you and your girlfriend. I had thought he was referencing our no-nonsense response to his nonsense, aka daily communication, scheduling multiple meetings to address these issues, etc. But my girlfriend believed that he was speaking towards our skin colors. Her, a black woman, and myself, a white man. My girlfriend jokingly told me to check my privilege before getting serious and explaining to me that we were experiencing discrimination at the very least. So the solution? I did some research and discovered the property manager worked for a larger organization that owns several complexes throughout the country. I found that their director of human resources on LinkedIn and made a connection. I then emailed her copies of all email correspondence, screenshots of the lease, pictures of the internet speed flags advertised by the road, and more screenshots of online speed tests. We further noted his comment and the implications behind it. The human resources director replied within a few hours and promised us that she would look into the issue. About 2 days later, the property manager called and asked us to come by his office at our convenience. We showed up near the end of the day and sat down across from him. He then proceeded to ask us if we would be willing to write a letter stating that we accepted his apology, despite not yet offering said apology, and in return he would credit us a month's rent, accept our damages attachment, and promise to have the ISP on site within a week to assess the internet issues. Well, we declined. He got personal with us and revealed his job may be at stake and asked us to reconsider. My girlfriend leaned forward and said, "There are other communities in this neighborhood that may be more accepting of people like you. You're welcome to leave." The property manager was replaced in a week with a super sweet older woman who not only gave us all the things the original property manager had promised, the 1-month credit, accepting the damages attachment, and then further scheduling maintenance to fix said damages, also having the ISP assess and upgrade the internet to promised speeds, but she also made it clear that her office was always open for anything we may need. I looked up the old property manager about a few months later on LinkedIn, and of course he was still unemployed. And the next one is titled, "Boss was reluctant to do anything about Deadweight coworker because he was not making obvious mistakes." We decided to make it obvious. So we had this coworker on our team. The best way to describe him is to use a Homer Simpson line, "Everyone says they have to work a lot harder when I'm around." Well, projects given to him usually were not completed correctly, not entirely completed, or not even worked on at all. He violated security protocols, gave out equipment to other departments, and would occasionally disappear for hours. He would always have someone else to blame for his problems, aka contractors, staff in other departments, but the last straw for the rest of us was when he tried to throw his own team under the bus. We all knew he was skating by because we would fix his mistakes to keep everything else running. And admittedly, it's hard to get fired from a state job, but after blaming us and having to hear about it, well, that was the last straw. So the rest of us on the team stopped helping him and we stopped fixing his mistakes. He was not making obvious mistakes before, but now they were obvious. The mistakes were piling up and fast. We would collaborate with him only down to the bare minimum. He had no reason to blame us if our contributions to a project were completed and his weren't. And then came the kiss of death. He took a week off. With him not around, everything that piled up started getting completed by the rest of us. New tasks were completed on top of that and on time. Even my boss could not ignore the simple fact that the place ran smoother without him around. After he returned, everything started piling back up again, so we came into work a couple of weeks ago and it was announced that he had left the organization. Not one person was surprised. The thing that amazes me about this whole thing is that nobody coordinated it, none of us hatched a plan, we all just individually decided that enough was enough. You wanted obvious? You got it. It's impressive how much it takes to get fired for some people. My last 2 jobs both featured a teammate who essentially collected a paycheck and did nothing in return. At least my manager here had the balls to do what was needed. It's also amazing that in the end there's less work to do with him gone because tasks don't need to be done twice anymore. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. So this is a story about my uncle that I think really shows how scummy an HOA can really be. My uncle was a Vietnam veteran and after years in the army and then life medically kicking him in the rear, he did not end up in a great position. He was bound to a wheelchair and could not really do much of anything for himself. For the most part, he got help with a lot of things from programs like getting meals delivered or people to help clean the house. He was on a fixed income though, so extra things are just out of the question for him. My aunt died a few years back, so it was just him. He also lived in New England, which meant that when winter came, snow was not far behind. That meant a walkway and driveway that needed to be shoveled out. My cousin used to be in charge of doing things like that, but once he finished college and moved out, my uncle could only rely on free services. His neighbor used to help, especially when it was just a few inches and not that big of a job. One day though, there was a huge snowstorm where he lived, and 2 feet of snow was the final measurement when it finally stopped. People came outside to clear their walkways, but obviously my uncle couldn't. To make things worse, his neighbor was out of town and could not use his snowblower to help. Sure, people came around offering to shovel for money, but it was not like back in the day when kids would go around asking for a few bucks. For a walkway and driveway, after 2 feet of snow, these people were asking for like $100. Way out of his budget. He did the only thing he could, which was nothing. He did not like leaving the place unshoveled, he just simply could not do anything about it. And if you are wondering why I didn't help, well, it was because I lived in another state. Most people would be understanding, but when the HOA president passed his house and saw that he had not shoveled anything, he called my uncle to yell at him about it. And all of this conversation is just what my uncle told me, so the wording is probably not exact. HOA guy said, "I can see that you did not shovel anything. The place looks horrible." "Uncle, I'm just having some trouble since I cannot shovel it myself or afford anybody to do it. Once the neighbor comes back, he will probably help me take care of it." "HOA, that's not good enough. Being in a chair does not give you an excuse to be lazy. We will fine you $500 every single day that this is not cleared." "Uncle, I'm just on a fixed income and the VA can only help with so much." "HOA, I was a major general in Vietnam and you don't hear me whining about the VA. For those like me that needed to ask, that is an extremely high-ranking position, way above what my uncle was." The call ended, and despite him pleading for more time or even some reduction in fines based on his service, age, disability, etc., they refused. He had not paid them yet, but he called us scared with what he was gonna do because he would owe them and he would be in major debt. 2 feet of snow doesn't just melt, especially when it is freezing out. The latest letter from the HOA said that they were gonna sue him if he didn't pay them and get rid of the snow. My dad told him not to pay anything and instead to call the local news and tell them about what was going on here. He did just that, talking to both the local media and local veterans groups to tell them how the HOA was basically abusing their power. The local news picked up the story and wanted to come interview him. As for local veteran groups, they were angry at the HOA for doing this to him, especially when one was also in the services. A few younger guys came and cleared his walkway. However, for him, not for the HOA. When interviewed by the news, he was just very honest and straightforward with the story, telling them that he knew he needed to have his walkway shoveled and he was not trying to argue about these HOA rules. He just wanted some compassion and consideration for his situation. That the fees were far too high and he had no way to pay them thousands of dollars for just some snow. They ran the story because a disabled veteran getting screwed over by an HOA, well, that is something special. The story ran and people in the neighborhood were so angry at the HOA and started calling and telling them off, saying that they should be helping vulnerable members of the community and not hurting them, asking why none of the money would go towards helping people like that after a storm. The next HOA meeting was pure chaos and my uncle was even there since some neighbors brought him knowing it would get crazy. It turns out that some people dug more into the HOA president and his claims of his high-ranking position in the army during the Vietnam War. Well, the background came back and it turns out he not only did not hold that position, but he never served in the military at all. This was a guy that bragged to many people about this too, so they all considered him the worst kind of scumbag. I would not even call it a meeting by the sounds of it, more like a hunt for this guy's head. Everybody was forced out without a meeting even really happening. 2 days later, he officially stepped down from his role as HOA president along with some other announcements directed at my uncle. The case was being dropped and all fines were going away. Smart move for them, because they would have been destroyed by a judge for that one. The news even did a follow-up story talking about how there are laws to protect vulnerable people from HOAs, giving out resources and telling people to call if they think somebody in a position like my uncle's is getting taken advantage of. My uncle also did not need to worry about his walkway getting snowed in after that. His neighbor was almost always there and willing to do it for him, and if he was not there, there were always more people willing to help him. Always for free, even though he refused to let them go without giving them the little money he could afford as a tip. I know that there are more stories on here to count that expose HOAs and show that they can be greedy and horrible people. I wanted to share this one because some people don't know that even when HOAs do things they are within their rights to do, it doesn't mean that there's no protection. Laws do exist to help vulnerable people to not get screwed over by these HOAs. Those fines should have not been close to $500 a day, they just knew that he was a person they could get away with that from. Edit: I asked my uncle based on the comments if he got into any legal trouble from the stolen valor thing. I did not know it was a crime to lie about being in the service like the HOA president did until I started reading the comments. He told me that he wasn't sure, but as far as he knew, no charges were ever pressed against him. And yeah guys, with this we have reached the end of the video. However, if you cannot get enough of my content, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel to not miss any of my daily uploads, and also check out my podcast by searching for Ripe Stories on Spotify, Amazon, Audible, and other podcast platforms. You will often find exclusive episodes and early access to new content. Furthermore, please check out my Patreon by going to patreon.com/ripeyoutube or my YouTube membership program for even more exclusive stories. Thank you so much, and I will see you again tomorrow.